Hi, so recently I made a video about my favorite YA fantasy series, and today I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite standalone fantasy books. I realized looking at my shelves and like the ones that I've read and decided were like, these are the ones good enough to keep and be like shelf worthy, that I either don't read a lot of standalones, or if I do read a decent amount, most of the books that I end up enjoying enough to keep end up being series because there wasn't really a ton that I have. So what I'm doing is I'm just gonna mix all the different age ranges together. I have 3 adult fantasy books, I have 1 young adult, and then 1 middle grade. So the first one that I want to talk about, it's called Sword Heart. It's by T. Kingfisher. She's become a really well-known author in the fantasy world lately. And I know that Nettle and Bone in particular is like a really famous one of hers that kind of, I feel like, skyrocketed her name. And I have read that one, and I've also just this month read A House with Good Bones. But this was the first book that I read by her, and so far it is still my favorite. It's about this woman named Hala who's in her like early 30s, I believe, and she's working as a housekeeper for her great uncle, like taking care of him and his home and everything. And then he ends up passing away, and she finds out that she's inherited like everything from him, the home, all of his money, and all of her family and her are completely shocked that she was the one chosen for this. And they are trying to marry her off to who they choose so that way they can kind of lay claim to everything that she's just received. And one day she ends up opening this sword that she found from the scabbard, and it turns out that it was like an enchanted sword, and out from it, kind of like a genie from a bottle, comes this immortal swordsman named what's his name again? Sarkis. I'm not 100% sure how to say that, but yeah, so this immortal swordsman comes out of the sword and ends up kind of having to protect her from like bandits and family and a whole bunch of craziness. And it's just like a really fun adventure story, and it also has like a very refreshingly mature romance in it. But T. Kingfisher's sense of humor is just hilarious. She has this really dry sense of humor, at least in the books that I've read from her. They've all kind of had that similar feel to them. Not like the genres of the books. All of the books that I've read from her have very different kind of subgenres of fantasy, I guess you could say. But she has this undertone of like dry wit that I can't get enough of. But yeah, so the romance was good, the writing was witty and charming, and the main character was not like annoying at all. She was like an intelligent, mature woman who like I could enjoy. So I enjoyed Nettle and Bone, but one thing I found really surprising is that in Nettle and Bone and Sword Heart, the main characters are both like approximately 30-year-old or early 30s women. And I was very shocked to see, going from this book to Nettle and Bone, how different I felt like their maturity levels were. Like when I read Nettle and Bone, I really enjoyed the book, but I had to, in my mind, imagine that the main character was actually like 16 because she felt too immature for the age she was supposed to be, and it didn't make sense to me. So even though I really enjoyed the book, the age didn't work. Whereas this one, I felt like she was actually an adult. So both are good, but I like this one a little bit more. The next book that I want to talk about is Slewfoot by Brom. It's a fantasy horror that takes place in an old Puritan town in Connecticut. The main character is this woman named Abatha, who I believe is also around 30 years old, coincidentally, and her husband ends up passing away. And so after that happens, like she's always been kind of like the weird one of the town, I guess. And her mother was also like a healer, you know, where she came from before she, Abatha moved to the colonies. And so she never really fit in. And then after her husband dies, it becomes even more kind of an issue because now she's a widower who also doesn't really conform. So everyone is like trying to suggest that she remarry and kind of give up the independence that she's just gained and become under the rule of another person. And also she would lose the home that her and her late husband spent years building and working the land and everything. So obviously that's not something that she's wanting at all. And she ends up befriending and going to, for help, this spirit in the woods. And they start working together, and it ends up becoming like pretty dark. And it was really interesting just to see Abatha's journey and all of the hurdles and everything that she has to work to overcome throughout this book. And then the writing style in this was just really beautiful. It does a really good job at connecting. You feel like you're struggling with what she's struggling with, I guess. At least that's how I felt. And also, I listened to the audiobook for this first, and that was done so good. There is a song that the main character sings in this book, and the narrator had such an amazing voice. She actually like sang it, and it just like really added to like the artistic element, I guess, of the audiobook. But I did end up buying the physical one after listening to it. And in the book, they actually have, where are they? There's some artwork in here. I'm not going to show some of them, but like, just so you can like see, this is Abatha, and I'm seeing if there's any others that I can show with it being okay. These are some of like the small little wood spirits, and that's what I'll be okay showing. I don't want to show anything else and kind of give spoiler-ish things, you know? But yeah, so either way you go, the audiobook's amazing. The physical book is beautiful and has artwork, and just all around, I highly recommend. This is the book that made me realize that I could really enjoy some fantasy horror. So I definitely plan to read more of that subgenre. The last of the adult fantasy books that I'm gonna recommend is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I really want to look for a different edition of this though, because I'm not a fan of the US cover art. I do not think it looks good, but the book itself is so good. I will say it's not like some grand epic like his other, like he has the series Mistborn and Stormlight Archives, and then, you know, some of the other large name, well-known fantasy books. But this is really good if you want something that's like fast-paced and has that light adventure feel, but is still really well thought out. Like the world is really interesting, and I love the magic system in this. Like the magic system involves the use of like something called breath, and then also different colors and stuff. I thought it was a really great magic system, particularly for this kind of story, because it is like magical, like has that magical I guess vibe where like it feels fantasy, you know? It doesn't feel too technical and stuff like how some fantasy worlds have, but it also still has like a little bit of that structure and everything to it that I feel like is more common nowadays, because most of the time people want to know that, you know, the main character isn't just going to be overpowered and just able to do whatever. Like nowadays I feel like we want typically to see like more rules to our magic. So I feel like it does a good job at being in that middle ground and still having kind of like the magical feeling of its magic system, which I think works really good for the type of book it is, where it's a little bit more easygoing but still does a lot in the amount of space that it has. Like it being a standalone, like I feel like it does a really good job at covering a bunch of different aspects of the world and also letting you get to know the characters really well. I enjoyed every character in this book. There was one that it took me a little bit to start liking, but even when that happened, then I was just like, oh, okay, this is like great character development, like, you know? So I enjoyed all of the characters, the magic system, the world, the writing, I enjoyed. I've heard some people like think that it was, you know, one of his weaker ones, like writing wise, but I think that that's just because it's not meant to be something as complex in my opinion, and I don't have an issue with that, which you'll see from one of my last one that I'm going to talk about, you'll see as well. But the next one that I want to talk about is the one young adult fantasy that I have here, and it is Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young. So I just reread the back of this and it gives away a lot. If you are one of those people that doesn't, like, it's like a pet peeve of yours to read the back of the book and then have things that happen like later in the book, like significantly later, I would just go into this without really reading the back because holy cow, it's a lot. But the gist that I'm gonna give you is that it is based on Norse mythology, and the main girl is named Aelin, and she's the daughter of like the head of her clan, and she is always like been a proud and big fighter. Like she is front lines there trying to fight there with her dad and everything. And then one day she is fighting and she sees her brother who has been dead for I think 3 years, I think, something like that. And she's like, there's no way, you know? But yeah, her brother ends up being alive. Some stuff happened in like a past battle, and it turns out he is now living with the enemy clan. Some things happen, and she ends up tagging along with them to their home and kind of ends up being stuck in the enemy territory, you know, for a while. And I just really enjoyed the story because, like, so I did get frustrated with the main character sometimes, but that's just because I tend to get frustrated with like hot-headed characters a lot. But Adrienne Young does like a really good job at making worlds and like people who you can like feel connected to. Her Fable duology and this book are the three that I've read by her, and then I also DNF'd one that was by her, but the three that I have read through, like, I have loved everything about them. But the characters she creates, I feel like she does an amazing job at, in a short amount of time, making them like completely well-rounded. Like you can see their flaws, you can understand like what drives them, you know? And so this book was really emotional to me because the things that drive the characters and like kind of the themes of the story and stuff, I feel like were really hard hitting, you know, because a lot of it had to do with like making decisions on what matters to you, you know, like which do you prioritize, doing something for yourself or being there for your family and your duty, and then which do you prioritize, the people you love or the beliefs that have formed who you are and that have like been a part of your life and your ancestors' lives and everything. So I think it does a really good job at showing like the struggle of having multiple things in life that matter to you and having to find like either balance or prioritization, you know? So there's a lot of emotional moments in it, and I thought it was really well done. So the last book that I'm going to talk about is actually a middle grade book, and it is by my first favorite author that I ever had, Gail Carson Levine. This one is called The Two Princesses of Bamar. I don't even know if you can read that in that lighting, but I have loved all of her books that I've ever read, except I wasn't a fan of Ella Enchanted, which is interesting, but that might be just because I watched the movie growing up, so I'm probably biased on that one. But I have a few of her young adult and some like middle grade standalones. She basically creates fairy tales, like not retellings, she like makes her own. But this one I decided to go with as my favorite, even though I enjoy so many of her books, because I read this in like middle school, I don't remember, and I've read it a few times since and still enjoy it, but it is the epitome of old school fairy tale adventure, like Disney vibes. It's just full of magic and sweet emotions and coming of age. It's just what a fairy tale is supposed to be. So I will forever love it. But anyways, it's about these two princesses. One is named Meryl and then one is named Addie. Meryl is like the brave, adventurous one, and Addie is perfectly happy staying safe inside the castle. But Meryl ends up falling ill, and there's no like known cure, and no one seems willing to really do anything about it. So Addie decides that she's gonna go on her first adventure to try and save her sister. And when I say classic fairy tale, like this has dragons and it has like magic boots that you like take a step and now you're like miles and miles away. And there's also like this magic tablecloth that just makes food appear. Like it just has all those elements that just make me feel all like warm and stuff inside. But yeah, it's a sweet story about her learning how to be brave and gain self-confidence and the love between siblings. And it's just a really cute story. So those are my favorite standalones. If y'all have read any of them, let me know what you think. If you know any that seem like similar vibes, I guess, feel free to let me know and I can check them out. Thanks for watching. Bye.